Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Randy Bach. I'm honored today to have with me for the second time Shifan Vliet, and tell us about yourself and your book. I have it actually up here for people to see, and I have my own copy as well. So here's the title for people to go over. But tell us about yourself and how you came upon this title, Mao's America.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for having me back. It's been a little while. Yes. And I think during that interview, I did mention that I was writing a book. And here I am. Finally, the book is out. And I'm very, very pleased. And also very pleased with the reaction. A lot of people give me feedback that they find the book absolutely informative. Yes, I have been speaking up since 2021, started with the school board in Loudoun County. And ever since then, and I've been invited to speak across the nation. And then I realized that a lot of people really have very little idea about communism, about the horror of communism, and have hardly any idea about what had happened in China, the Cultural Revolution and all that. And I realized an interview here and a speech over there won't do it. I have to write the book. And even that book, I have to tell you, is not enough to tell the stories of what happened in China and let people understand. Right now is the history repeating. And so my little background is that I lived my first 26 years in China. I lived through the entire Cultural Revolution, and I was one of those kids indoctrinated by the party. And after I graduated from high school, there was nothing for all of us kids in the city. So we were all sent to the countryside and to get our so-called re-education from the peasants, yes. And they have always beautiful things to tell us, and none of them is good. All of them are evil. So I was fortunate enough to be able to go to college after Mao died, and eventually at the age of 26, in 1986, I came to America.
Well, before we go on, I'd kind of like to go back over some of the history you just mentioned. It seems redolent of the Cambodian Cultural Revolution. I'm not sure what they called it, but Pol Pot, and having the cities emptied out and people, working and as peasants. I don't know if it's apocryphal, but it was mentioned that people with eyeglasses were taken out in particular, and there was no Twitter back then. There were no smartphones, and it's hard to really document that. I'm wondering, what is the essence of the Cultural Revolution? I think, like affirmative action, a lot of things, get these great sounding names.
The names are great.
What's wrong with a Cultural Revolution? Don't we want that right now? Get rid of some of the bad things in our culture and so forth. But, in specific, I'd like to kind of drill down on that aspect of taking people from the city who, have their own ways and learning from the peasants. I'm not against peasants per se, but which particular peasants did they pick, and how was it, and what happened there?
Okay, that's a big question, but I will just try to describe what happened during the Chinese Cultural Revolution and what's the purpose. It's a revolution. So remember, it's a revolution, and a revolution is really about destroy a social order, a political order, and destroy everything, burn everything down to the ground, and replace it with something new. So during the Cultural Revolution, that was exactly the goal. Only that at that time, it was the existing social order was Mao's own social order. That was Mao-style socialism. Why he wanted to overthrow his own order and overthrow his own party for power. And that's something we have to come back again, because that was all really the revolution is about, to destroy a social existing social system and replace it with power. So they want to destroy everything. That include the Chinese culture, and the culture existed before the Cultural Revolution. That means the CCP's own culture, because that's not radical enough. Everything has to go. So if you think about it, it's destroy everything, and destroy everything by who? This time, it's not by the army. It's not by military personnel. It's by young people, by kids, and it's by the Red Guards. And because this is a cultural revolution, and they have, after 17 years of indoctrination, from 1949 to 1966, they managed to create a whole generation of young people who know nothing about the past, who know nothing but one version of the truth. That is what they were taught. Mao Zedong thought, and they were so easy to manipulate. You know, Americans right now should ring the bell to them. And what's going on today here is also youth revolution. So they were set out to destroy everything. They were given the power. So with just a badge called Red Guard, they have the power of doing whatever, no consequences. The police were already, the criminal justice system has been destroyed because that was not radical enough. They were given the power actually over people's life or death. They have that kind of power. And so they destroyed everything, and they took down the those in power, because that's the real goal of the Cultural Revolution, to replace the people that Mao felt like it was not really that he could control, and he wanted to replace them. So they did all that. And so it is a revolution. We know who the revolutionaries are, but who are the enemy? You got to have enemy, right? That's a revolution. The enemies during the Cultural Revolution were those in power. They're really the CCP bureaucrats. The CCP bureaucrats from the lowest level to central government. The number one enemy of Cultural Revolution was Liu Shaoqi, the president of China. And they're all taken down and have to go through struggle session, humiliated, sometimes tortured, and some of them were killed right on the spot during the struggle session. And that was the Cultural Revolution. During the Cultural Revolution, up to 20 million people lost their lives. And this is something else people have to understand. Most of the people lost their lives not because the government sent out troops to kill them. It is all by people, by the other one group of people against another group of people. That is the key of communism.
So what was the actual modality when you say one group of people? And you say mention the Red Guard. So if these are the bureaucrats, they must have been in charge of something. I imagine, if I had to, kind of mentally paint the picture, if I have a garden and I have a scaffolding for my grapes, and the grapes are growing and so forth, and somehow I feel threatened by grapes, I don't know why, but I chop them down, I cut them down at the base, so I am bigger than the scaffolding, and the scaffolding can't threaten my house or whatever paranoid vision I happen to have. I'm assuming that there was some threat to his own power, just as Stalin had his purges. Yes. And he had show trials and everything like that. I'm not sure whether the same thing happened in Stalinist Soviet Union, but there has to be somebody to replace those people, presuming they're doing something useful. I don't know if they are, but if they are the head of the police chief or whatever, there has to be somebody replacing him. So with whom did they replace, and what was the underlying ideology of those replacing?
Okay. There's a difference between the Stalin's purge and Cultural Revolution. Stalin's purge was really the government against individuals, right? The police, secret police, and it was the government going after individuals that Stalin considered a threat to him. Mao was smarter than that. Mao used the Red Guards to go after those that he felt like he could not control anymore. And what was the accusation? The accusation was that they were the capitalist roaders. Roader meaning they other people want to take us back to the road to capitalism. And they were the ones that were revisionists. What is revision? Revisionism. Mao considered the Russian, the Soviet communism is no longer the real Leninism. They have been too softened. They have to be. They had been revised and betrayed Lenin. So those are the people that Mao wanted us to go after. Capitalist rulers and the revisionists. So take them down, all by the young Red Guards. Take them down, and then Mao. Okay, here's the story. So Mao. So the Red Guards did the job. They did the job in 2 years, finished the job, and they thought they're going to be the one to share power. They absolutely was so sure that they did the job for Mao. Mao would put them in power. So eventually they start to fight each other as factions because they were fighting for power. No, those were the useful idiots. After the job was done, Mao considered them a bother, a nuisance, a threat. So send them all to the countryside to be re-educated by peasants. And for me, I went to the countryside, not far from my home, not that far from the city. Those Red Guards were sent to the wilderness, no man's land, to cultivate farmland. Absolutely gulags. And that's something that the BMMers and Antifa, of course, they have no idea what will happen to them. It will be the same thing. After their usefulness was over, same fate waiting for them.
So the only thing worse than being a useful idiot is the one who no longer has a use and is still an idiot and is sent off.
Yeah. And that's why it's so important to know history. And that's why the left trying so hard not to teach the students, the young people, or the public in general, real history.
Yeah, I saw a meme earlier today, side by side, the vision of socialism, and it's people at a long table. They're all sharing food and all that kind of stuff. They're flower children, and it's bright spring day, and side by side is the reality of socialism with the same group of people, but they're all lined up, grim, no possessions, hungry, in line for basically the gallows or the gulags and so forth. Are there people aside from yourself kind of pointing out graphically or in movie form or something that will attract the attention of the youth these actual stark differences? Is there any kind of cultural beacon by which the youth might be able to learn and follow?
We don't have access to them. The universities were controlled by Marxists, and increasingly all the public schools, even private schools, were controlled by Marxists. We have limited access. So I have been doing this since 2021. And I think the key for the younger kids are the parents. And we need to teach the parents the history so that they can teach their children. I have been really working to find someone who would really undertake this task of making a documentary about the Chinese Cultural Revolution and compare it with basically what my book has trying to do. And we have to wake people up. People don't know what's going on because they don't know history. They know something is not right, but they can't figure out what it is. It is not the same old left, the same old Democrats kind of go off, kind of crazy. It is, the nature has changed. It is absolutely Marxist, communist revolution. The goal is very simple. The goal is to overthrow America, to replace it with totalitarianism.
Mm-hmm. So what are the pathways? Getting back to my garden example, the way you grow certain plants is you can cut them, you can splice things on, you can have plants grow a certain way in a certain position, you can kind of nurture them or not nurture them, you can feed them or not feed them. Just going over the chapters in your book, I'm going to leave out the first few, but there's two cultural revolutions, and then you have certain chapters: born guilty, how an ideology divides, red guards, cancel culture, destruction of families, the ones I want to get to, destruction of religion, making of the new man, ideological indoctrination. So, given that kind of different lattice work, so if you want your grapes to thrive, you grow them to the sun. If you want them, if you want to just kind of have dominion over them, I mean, maybe a better example would be dogs. I have my dog. I feed him. He hangs out in our bedroom. He's part of the family. So there are other people who have dogs that are for amusement. Michael Vick famously got convicted for abusing dogs, and they're having them fight each other to death. So they were I don't know what I suppose entertainment dogs in a perverse kind of way. And so you can have a dog in multiple different ways. You can have a dog for food. You can have a dog for any number of things. How are the people seen? And it seems always that going after the family and going after these bonds, religion, and so forth is a way of taking away people's ability to grow and thrive on the scaffolding example, to reach the sun, reach their maximum growth, and to keep them under some kind of control for their own kind of perverse pleasure, not to make everyone better, but to keep you on top.
You got it. And the key is control. The key is control. And talking about the garden, I just saw a tweet and a video of the Chinese agriculture police trying to destroy a plantation of bananas. Why? The government wants those farmers to grow sugar. You have to, control. And so they actually send the police and destroy the banana trees. And so that is communism, that is socialism, control. So that's a lot of people don't understand. They think socialism is about share, but they don't know how. How do you share? How do you share in socialism? It's the government decide. Government decide that yours is his, or hers is mine. The government decide. It is all about the control. And actually, sharing has nothing to do with socialism. It is just a beautiful slogan and get people to believe what they're doing and follow their agenda. They don't care nothing about people's well-beings. It's all about control. And what is control? Power. It's all about power.
Yeah, I'm just going to give a slight anecdote because I was behind the Iron Curtain in the 1980s, on a trip. My wife and I were on bicycles, and we saw what was then Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, a bit of East Germany. Mm-hmm. And as soon as we had come from Austria, we'd been in Western Europe and Central Europe before that. The smell, this is a minor point, but the pollution was egregiously bad. And if you look at the Soviet, they kind of were at the wellspring of some of the environmental movements and whatnot. So that the West kind of tinkers away at limiting its own industrial power and so forth. You can argue, but in the worst hellish toxic pits were in East Europe, in Romania and whatnot, because they decide what the rules are, and the rules don't apply to themselves. When they want something, they just do whatever.
Everything is decided by the central government and carried out all the way to the very bottom, like a village level. And so it's all uniform. Uniform is the key. Everything is the same and applied, and the decision was made by a few people. Talking about pollution, when I was in the countryside, there was a fertilizer factory not far from the village, and so the pollution was so bad. It was just smoke, and you could see for miles. And then the animals start to die, and the fruit trees stop producing fruits. And yet, it never occurred to me it's bad to people as well. And fortunately, I only lived there, for 3 years. But those peasants, they live there forever. God knows what they have. afterwards, all sorts of probably health problems.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is absolutely, they don't care about environment. Why would they care? All they care was power. So people who were taught that socialism is the solution, it's because they don't know anything about socialism.
Right. So there's a couple different segues we could travel, and you can decide which one. One is, how Marxist cultural revolution are we? Maybe we can save that for later. What happened to China after the Cultural Revolution? Deng Xiaoping, I believe, came to power, and in a sense, he was more capitalist. Is today's China still communist, or is it just merely, totalitarian or authoritarian, whatever? Not merely; those are bad enough. And how do they deal with the threat of actual capitalism and/or free market of ideas, such as with their dealings with Hong Kong and potentially Taiwan? So those are some mappings, and I don't know if any of those have an interest for you.
Yes, this is something that I see a lot of people said. China is changed. It's no longer a communist country. It's better than the United States. It's a capitalist country and it's safe. Okay, but they don't know history. Of course, they don't know history. And so after Mao's death in 1976, China was at the brink of total collapse. And actually, I think it's collapsed already. There is just nothing going on. A lot of people dead. People are divided and at each other's throat, just like today. The Americans are so divided at the family level, and there's no economy. People live in absolute poverty. Everything was rationed, and the ration was just give you enough to survive. Where some people did not even survive in the countryside, and so Deng Xiaoping. Actually, Deng Xiaoping was accused of being a capitalist ruler during the Cultural Revolution and was purged. So he believed that capitalism was the only way to save the CCP from its deathbed because it's absolutely bankrupted. The country was bankrupted. The party was bankrupted. So he come up with this idea, and you probably heard about. It doesn't matter it's a black cat or white cat, as long as it can catch mice, it's a good cat. So translated, it doesn't matter it's a capitalism or whatever ism. If I can save China, it's a good ism. So he brought in capitalism, but he never gave up communism. He only invited the capital from the West, and he did not invite capitalism into China.
Right. So I just like to make this one little distinction because capitalism is actually a term from Karl Marx. It's actually an insult to the system, as if capital is the only thing that happens, as if money, it's the concept that bankers are like ruling the world and their money is the only thing that happens. I actually prefer the term, free marketism.
I know, exactly. And I did say that in my book. It should be called free market system or free market economy. Yeah, but he did not want the free market economy, only want the capital. So, and then the I'm kind of stuck with this term. Yeah, so that's what happened. He brought in capitals and foreign investment, and China was saved. But he refused to have political reform. He only had economic reform. And so he brought, but even that brought in a lot of freedom, because free market system absolutely resulted in more freedom. And so I remember in the late 1990s and early 2000 when I went home to visit, and there's a lot of unprecedented freedom. People could openly talk about things that in the Cultural Revolution they're not even to dream about talking. But that is a problem. If you have freedom and a democracy, you threaten the CCP, right? So they have to do something. And so during the whatever called the reform era, there's a lot of freedom. And people criticize the party, criticize the government, And also it brought in a lot of corruption. The corruption come to the point that it will going to destroy CCP. So finally, in 2012, they finally found someone who could do something about the corruption, and that was Xi Jinping. And what he did is absolutely get rid of, kill the democracy, or the early stage of democracy, and that's the only way he could preserve CCP. So since then, he has taken China back to Mao's path, total control, and he did not care about economy. And to him, the number one worry is preserve power.
There's a lot there from which to dissect, and we can go in, again, a number of different directions. I guess first comes to mind is that China has become wealthier. I don't think it's the wealthiest place, but it's certainly wealthier than it was. When they have the CCP, the communist, Chinese Communist Party, have they? I mean, it doesn't seem as if there's may not be free marketism per se, may not be a free exchange of ideas, but they are certainly, I don't think, communist per se. My term of art is a mafia-ocracy. Like if Tony Soprano were running a country, he would probably want engagement and people, making money so he could get his cut of the action. So I don't know if it's an actual term out there. I have to check, but mafia-ocracy, I think is in a sense, mafia-ocracy, because what you have is a central control, and you have people working and doing things. You don't want them, suffering in the same way as under the Cultural Revolution. The cultural part is not necessarily the point. People need to be working, but they have to also, bow down to Tony Soprano. You can run your restaurant, but you have to give Tony Soprano his 10%. He doesn't want you to stop being a restaurant. He doesn't want you to stop being a discotheque. He just wants his cut because he's in charge. He's keeping you from having things worse happen to him, to you than Tony Soprano. So it's kind of a protectionist aspect. And in a sense, we could segue also to the safetiest aspects that happened during COVID and the pursuit of zero COVID, which is kind of I think a lunacy policy. But it seems to speak to your point that the economy is not the full measure of his interests. If it had been, he wouldn't have locked down the place, and he wouldn't have locked it down for Omicron, which in my view is kind of common cold variety, as he did in 2022 and whatnot. So, I maybe there's a question in there, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on anything I've just mentioned.
I'm not quite sure that is a mafia is the right term to describe it. But one thing you have to, everyone has to be aware, and you said that they're not really communists. They are never real communists. It's all
That's a great
tactics. That is the key. Everything you have to think about communism in terms of control and in terms of power. And you think that those people that promote DEI, diversity, equity, do you think they really care about it? No, all those are the tactics. The tactic is to control. And also, it's not like the government wants a cut. The government control 80% of the wealth, and then the little people have a little cut. So it's the other way around. They control everything. They absolutely, but just have this so-called kind of capitalism in China. The problem is it brought in democracy, or the idea of democracy, and people started to question things, and that's not good. And that's something that had to be controlled and had to be eradicated. So that's why now Xi Jinping does not care about economy as much. It's all about power, and it's all about power after all. And he had enough money now to do a lot of things, and that's why he had that COVID policy that really have the heaviest blow on the already damaged economy. So I don't know they're going to survive. I'm not really that focused on the news about economy but I think a lot of people question whether they can survive this time, but they don't care. That's the thing. You say, oh, how about his policy will bring back poverty. Did they care? No. The Chinese people right now were told that they have been prepared to tighten their belts, and they have been prepared that the ration system is coming back. Only thing they care is power.
Well, that's an excellent point. And before we kind of segue to Mao's America, the emphasis on the American part, and kind of the thesis of your book, I'd like to kind of go back to one other point. Like, again, your years in the countryside, as it were, peasants, struggle sessions. I'd like you to maybe define for people what is a struggle session. We hear these words, critical theory, struggle session, the relentless pursuit of I guess the truth, as it were, but in their own politically sanctified way. What literally was that like for you? You're working. What do people say and think, and how? What is a struggle session, first of all?
Yeah, the struggle session actually took place in the city mostly, and during the early stage of Cultural Revolution. Struggle session is basically a public trial. And so if you denounce someone, and there's a lot of people who were being denounced left and right, anyone in power, including teachers, because teachers have power over students, right? Anyone was has to go through a struggle session. Struggle session is just a gathering of people, and the enemy of or the target of the struggle session usually is on the stage, and then they have to wear a big sign with their name and their label, capitalist, roader, and anti-revolutionary, and whatever, and then they have to confess their sin, and then they have to listen to the denunciation and by the masses. That's called the term that Mao loves, the masses. And then some is just verbal, but mostly it becomes physical, and many killed right there on the stage.
Killed by what and by whom?
By the Red Guards and by the masses. And that's what Mao was such a evil communist. He used one group of people to go after the other. And mostly you can say that he killed those people, the masses. That's people's voice, that people demand, those people, the target of the revolution being punished. And that's always the case, the masses.
But it's not like they had a Gallup poll or a Rasmussen poll to decide what the will of the people was. It's only the voices he heard in his own head. His embodiment.
All the people there, some just go there for the ride, and there's some have to. During the Cultural Revolution, just like today, silence is violence. You cannot just say, oh, this is too complicated, I don't know, I'm just going to remain silent. You don't have that luxury. You have to join the revolution. And if you don't show enough enthusiasm, you are labeled as capitalist, or you're labeled as counter-revolutionary. So it's the intimidation and coercion, and then people just have to go. And so some become, they really got involved, and others just stay as bystanders. But by being bystanders, you absolutely become part of the violence.
So in your own family, what year was that you got sent to the countryside, and what happened to the other members of your family? Was it split up, and what was the actual day-to-day like there?
Yeah, the violence of Cultural Revolution took place in the early stage, and it's pretty much between 1966 and 1968, and maybe part of 1969. That's when the Red Guards did all that, and most of the killing took place then, and they were all exiled. So after that, and so there was no mass or fewer mass struggle sessions and violence. And so when I went to the countryside, it was 1975, and it was relatively, the mass movement was relatively quiet. And so I did not really see much violence during those 3 years I was in the countryside. So what I witnessed was the beginning, and I was very young. Yeah, I was a schoolgirl, and I think from 7 to 9, that's the time that that was the worst part.
And were you picked out to go to the countryside because of your family, because everybody was?
No, everybody, all the young people graduated from in the city and had to go because there's no jobs. There's nothing for the young people. And so what to do with them? Well, go and get re-educated.
So the re-education part, what literally was the re-education? What was the theme? What's the course load of re-education? What's the message?
Yeah, what's the curriculum, right? It's just what a narrative. Sounds good. Nothing, hard labor. And what do we learn from peasants? We learn from them that we are now all at the same level. You know, we become slaves. We're all slaves, but now we become the slaves of the communist plantation.
And did anyone, I mean, I assume there's no place to go and there's no transportation, whatnot, but did anyone give up or revolt or decide they're going to drop it and go someplace else? I mean, is that was there any possibility of that?
It's complicated. Okay. So from very early on in the early 50s, the CCP implemented what's called a household registration system, that everyone have to register where you were. So if you were in a village, and that's where you can live, you can't go anywhere else. If you're in the city, and then a city of I'm from Chengdu, and I was my family was registered as the resident of Chengdu. We could not just go to Beijing and live, or Shanghai. So because of that, and everyone had no movement, freedom of movement. You stay where you were. So during the Cultural Revolution, when we sent down to the countryside, we have to change our household registration. So I lost my residency in the city. I become a villager, and then you have no ration, and that was given to the residents of city. So if you don't stay there, okay, you can go home, but you have nothing to eat. You have to share with your family, and it's complicated. But anyway, so I stayed there. If you work, every day, if you go out and work, you get the points. And so, and then in harvest time, you use your points in exchange for produce, crops, whatever. Does it make any sense? It's absolutely, we were slaves of the state.
Yeah, possessions. Did you have possessions?
Well, I have to consider myself a well-to-do family in that time, and so at least that my parents had a decent salary for a family of 5, and I did not know that until I just met someone, and she told me we're from the same city, and she told me that for a family of 4. His parents make 50 yuan a month, and my parents make 200 yuan a month. You see that difference?
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge difference. And I did not know because I had hardly anything. And I can't even imagine that her family, she said she will get a good beat if she lost 10 cents.
Right.
Because that 10 cents to them was just so important.
So just on a silly question, I guess, young girls, young boys, there's love in the air, relationships and so forth. I mean, are you able to have any type of social life or dreams or I don't know, crushes and so forth?
When I was in high school, that was the time actually for about a year, Deng Xiaoping was brought back to power to manage the mess. And so we were told that we may able to go to college. And we were thinking about to start to dream, and I described that in my book. I started to dream of maybe a future. And then quickly that he was purged again as the unreformable capitalist roader. And then all you can think about is our future is the countryside. So green. I never had adolescence, if you ask me, and none of my friends of our generation think about, being a teenager and having some kind of ideas about the future. Not all in the mode of survival. Oh my God, I'm going to be 16 and I have to go to the countryside. Would I ever be back to the city? Do I spend my rest of my life in the countryside as peasant? Those are the issues the consumers. And I don't remember. And of course, I have no idea what romance is. I have no idea what sex was about until I was way into my 20s. That is absolutely a suppression of ideas, and it was awful. That's all I can say.
Yeah. I mean, there's also on a medical basis, there's oftentimes a suppression of actual menstruation. Girls in prison camps and the labor camps and so forth, they can stop menstruating and under stress. I mean, a lot of runners do. A lot of girls these days are running marathons and tracks as teenagers.
Yeah, stress. Mm-hmm.
And they get a stress amenorrhea. They stop having periods. I don't want to get too personal on that, but how do you deal with girlhood, working on as a peasant? And I guess secondary question would be, do the peasants who are there, or villagers or whatever, do they resent your coming in?
Yeah, they absolutely do, because they consider us taking the share of what they limited resource that they had. Absolutely. But some places it was worse. And so there were 3 girls, and I was one of them, were sent to a production team. And I think they accepted us okay. But they told us, you're here to fight over the resources. So, yeah, we were not welcome. Mm-hmm. And a lot of young people, I have a lot of young girls who were sexually abused by those who were in control, like the production team leaders. And many had that kind of.
You figure if they can deal with impunity, they're not going to be punished by anybody if they're, if they are the law and they're lawless.
They're the law. Whoever in power had power over whoever under them. It's always the case. So the people that have powerless are those that are in the very bottom.
So Mao's America. Let's talk about the United States and or other parts of kind of the non-CCP world. What are the harbingers? What are the signs, the omens that we might take as warnings redolent of the Cultural Revolution and or CCP influence in general?
I think first of all, people have to realize people have to really understand all those attractive narratives and slogans that we covered a little bit. And so, and realize it has nothing to do with those lofty goals like equity. Equity absolutely is a concept of a Marxist concept. It's absolutely utopia, a dream. And equity and diversity, all this are tools. Tools for what? Tools for them to destroy our system, which is a constitution republic. Destroy it and replace it with totalitarianism. And that's why when people read my book, and I laid it out, and what happened in China, what happened here, and then you realize that's what they're doing. And so what's the end? The end is any movement or revolution that claim to liberate a group of people, not all, but a group of people. In China, it was the poor, right? It's liberate the poor. And here is the marginalized people, the oppressed, anyway, the people with identity. That is absolutely a sign. And this is a Marxist revolution. And they use those people as an excuse for their revolution. And they care nothing. They don't give a damn for those people, because those people just the pawns for them. And that happened in China, it happened in Russia, it happened in Cuba, it happened in every communist countries and socialist countries in the world. Those people are used. They are useful idiots, and they will be discarded as soon as their usefulness is over. And that's the most important thing for people to understand. American Revolution or the War of Independence never claimed that they're fighting for a group of people, right? They don't. They fight for all people, rich and poor, and whatever. So Marxist revolution always claimed they're fighting for a group, and that group is always described as the oppressed. So, and the result is always the same, always the same. So not only the oppressed, so-called oppressed, stay oppressed, and those who do better become part of the oppressed. So it become a very few ruling over all of us.
You know, I think the Cultural Revolution is an interesting example. Presumably, you know, Mao and we'll call him Mao 1.0, produced whatever Maoism was supposed to produce in terms of communism and equity, blah, blah, blah. And that wasn't enough when people were starting to threaten him. So he made Mao 2.0, which is to get rid of all people who are close to him. And it seems to me just kind of like getting back to the gardening example, anything that grows too big, you chop down. And so you can always be, you know, the slightly tallest. And a lot of what, you know, people think of equity, you know, equity and equality are different things. You know, equality tends to be an equality of opportunity. Equity is a post facto conception that everybody has to have the same thing, regardless of what their talents, ability, or work.
Yes.
And you know, your equal ownership, whether you devoted any effort or not. You know, at the end of the day, you know, there seems to be more. If there isn't any equality, if there is a presence of equality in Maoist China, it's an equality of misery. That everyone's, you know, for the most part, aside from the CCP and the Red Guard, or whatever, they have an equality of misery. They have an equity in slavery. They have exactly the same opportunities. The people who are in power, they're not living on the farms. Mao wasn't re-educating himself by the peasants and so forth. But you know,
it's always bring people down. That's the only way they can achieve so-called equity.
So it's kind of like, no offense to short people, but it's like being the tallest dwarf. You know, you're not necessarily helping dwarfs or future generations, you know, by having only you know, dwarfism. You know, and you know, dwarfs can be, you know, they're great human beings and all that kind of stuff. But I assume, you know, given the genetic lottery, they might choose something else. But it seems to me that there's only the opportunity to be, you know, the one in power, that you've kind of suppressed everybody else, so you can grow by pushing everybody else down, as opposed to growing by becoming bigger yourself.
Yeah, and then again, what's the goal? The goal is easier to control. You bring everybody down, and absolutely not just down, and you sit them against each other. That's how you control people.
Yeah.
It's all about control. Whatever you think and what they're doing here, doing there, if you look at through the lens of a Marxist power struggle, and you understand what they are doing this, why? Because it will help them to get into power. And the other thing I really want to articulate, I'm trying to articulate this. Okay, people say, okay, you say that America now is having a cultural revolution, kind of like Mao's cultural revolution. But why in China now they don't do that? Why there's no cultural revolution in China? Right? I think a lot of people ask that question. Well, they're Marxists. Why they're not doing this? Well, easy. Why did Mao launch the Cultural Revolution? It's to seize power. Why Xi Jinping would not do that? He has power. That is the difference. We are experiencing all this chaos, this riot and looting and absolute craziness is because they want
Right.
overthrow.
Well, I would argue slightly that the COVID experience in China was a form of cultural revolution in the sense that it was people were literally welded into their apartments, and they were barbed wire around their complexes, and then again this kind of second generation of COVID zero, who's keeping people away from their work, away from opportunity, and I just can't imagine they were that scared of an Omicron virus.
Now here, yeah, I have to say, no, that's not cultural revolution. Cultural revolution is mobilize the masses.
Fair enough.
Mobilize the masses against another group of masses, and then create chaos so that you can overthrow the system and seize power.
Fair enough.
It's always remember, and that's why we see all this, why there's no one there to stop the looting. That's good for destabilize a society. Mm-hmm. And once they have power, you think those useful idiots say, okay, now we can just go to the store and get things. Wait until they have total control of the power. You all will be arrested and sent to gulags. All of them. Not one of them will be able to just go to the store. And try that in China and see it in China today. And whether you can get away. You won't be get away because they want stabilize once they had power.
All right.
That's the difference.
I appreciate that. That's a good lesson. I thank you for that distinction. So for today, you were talking about TikTok and the leader, the CEO of TikTok, who's Singaporean, and Senator Cotton's interviewing him. And I guess Congressman Ted Lieu had some comment about Cotton's asking him whether he'd ever been a part of CCP. I'm wondering just whether you can talk about that episode, A, and B, TikTok in general. Should we worry about TikTok? Is that a reasonable place to be on? I have not joined TikTok, but everyone tells me to, because a lot of these videos and so forth are clips that people potentially could learn. Is TikTok a potential useful tool for the world, or is it still some kind of manipulated aspect of CCP power control? I just don't know where to go with this.
Well, it's obviously an asset of the CCP to access the Americans or the Western or the whole world and people and gather data, personal data, and push all sorts of pro-CCP narratives and narratives that ferment violence, a ferment revolution, basically. And that's why the Democrats love it. They would not let it go because it's been so helpful to them to push their narrative. And then they can say it's a foreign company and we have freedom of speech. And so it is absolutely CCP and the Democrats too, to indoctrinate the young people and to ferment revolution. And so people say, oh, it's a private company. Wake up. There's nothing exists in China that can be called a private entity that is independent of CCP's control. Everything and everyone in China belong to the CCP, including the Chinese, overseas Chinese. That's what the CCP consider everybody that Chinese belong to them. That's why they would implement police station in America and really monitor those who.
I heard there was something in the U.S. that they have this place in San Francisco that's like
New York City. No, in Flushing in New York. Yeah, they have Chinese police stations, and then they monitor who says what against the CCP. Singaporeans. Singapore has so heavily infiltrated by the CCP. And CCP would never, ever have someone managing their company that they cannot control. And the reason they choose this guy, Mr. Chu, is because Mr. Zhou, that's his real Chinese name, is because he's bought and controlled. And only people, so the American people have no clue, would think, it's a private company. He's the Singaporeans. He's controlled. He absolutely is controlled. Whether he's a party member, I don't know. It doesn't have to be a party member. He has to be the one that obey the order from the CCP.
So what's the speaking of COVID and vaccinations? What's the vaccination for cultural Marxism, CRT? And we're rounding out the hour, so maybe closing thoughts about what American youth and or Americans in general should take away from all this.
History. They have no idea what communism is about. They have no idea about the horrors of communism. All this that's happening today in America happened before. And we know the result. That's what I tell people in America, that we are still watching the movie unfolding. But I've seen another movie just like this, and I know the ending. And not only I watched it, I was in that movie. So I want to warn people, the ending will be the destruction of America. We just have to keep on spreading the message, and you are part of that effort. And so if we can reach one more person, another 10 people, another 100, we'll keep doing it.
Well, thank you very much. People can buy your book. It's Mao's America, A Survivor's Warning. And I have my copy already. It's excellent. I have not finished it. I'd like, just as a closing word, I have a book as well, not quite as popular perhaps, but and maybe a little bit more obscure. But if people want to help support my video cast here and get great guests, such as Shifan Vliet, my book is Overturning Zika, the Pandemic That Never Was. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it right now, but I recommend you buy it because it helps support the podcast. And even better if you read it, because as she says, history is important. You know, if people had read my book, actually, it wasn't quite a book at the time, but it was an article in 2019. If they'd read that about Zika, about the bad science that went into this pandemic, as it were, of Zika microcephaly, there were no Zika tests anywhere in Brazil. There was no backlog of registry of microcephaly cases. So it's kind of like concoct that out of thin air, and it became a little bit of a political movement because they wanted to change the abortion laws in Brazil. So it kind of took a lot of power. People actually wanted Zika microcephaly to be there. Frankly, the doctors who found it, they formed a group called Chick v. the Mission, and whose mission was to find a virus to bring, no joke, bring equity to the north of Brazil. So it was a social construct, a little bit like some of these Marxian ideas. They wanted a virus to be there so that they could bring attention and take the world power to the north of Brazil, which they felt was oppressed. So there are kind of like CRT-ish aspects to the origin of the Zika microcephaly phenomenon. And then the fact that it's never been, kind of dispelled, despite the fact that microcephaly has not increased anywhere on Earth in the intervening years, 2016 till now. So 8 years of no increase in microcephaly, despite the fact, Zika is a real virus, it's a dengue virus, and microcephaly is a real phenomenon. It just so happens one doesn't cause the other. But it's not politically correct to say that within the medical establishment. And so, my book is out there as a beacon, different kind from yours, but it's more towards the science community and the rationality community, if there still is one. People should examine things carefully. And so, speaking to your point, your major point, which is history is important. And if people had understood that, they might have been a little bit more skeptical when everyone says, "Oh, you're all going to die from COVID." Now, that's not to say some people didn't die, but the median age of death around the world was around 82 years old. And I love my octogenarians, and we kept my 90-year-old mother-in-law in the basement throughout the time, and as a kind of a nursing home patient of ours, and she survived COVID fine. She passed later on for other reasons, God bless her. But a lot of times people will call emergencies to get their own things going. So I think it speaks to your general point that power is the ultimate goal, control and power. And so by any means necessary is actually kind of a Marxian comment or phrase, but Zika microcephaly was used to people who wanted to get rid of abortion in Brazil, the people who wanted to limit population growth used Zika microcephaly. So it's by any means necessary. And a lot of these things don't fall into the categories of journalism per se. Historically, as reporting it, it falls in the category of journalism as means to an end, as part of the useful idiot phenomenon of bringing about so-called progressive change. And mind you, for all this progress, it seems to be rather progressing into a swirl of misery and so forth. So God bless them. Figure out which kind of progress you want. I personally would recommend yours, and I'm not looking forward to Mao's America, or frankly Mao's China, or any place else. And so final words for us.
I just want people to really pay attention and wake up, because there's too many people in the history that found themselves as in a situation like slavery, and they have no idea how they got there because they had paid no attention.
And they have no way to get out either.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you so much. I appreciate your being on. I recommend people buy your book, and thank you so much for your kind, inspirational words for us. They're useful. They're very much to the point. Learn history, but you got to learn it correctly. And this is a good place to start. Mao's America. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.